Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm doing my review of Capitol Combat 1990. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is Kevin Sullivan, Bam Bam Bigelow, and Cactus Jack versus Norman and the Road Warriors. Thought it was a good opening matchup for Capitol Combat 1990. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Animal hitting a devastating power slam on Cactus Jack. Norman and the Road Warriors were keeping the pace of the match, with Hawk hitting a clothesline off the top rope, pins for the three, and your winners of the match are Norman and the Road Warriors. Hats off to Norman and the Road Warriors for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is Johnny Ace versus Mean Mark. One thing I take away from this matchup is Mean Mark. Mean Mark was also known later on in his career as The Undertaker. The match itself, it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Johnny and Mean Mark, with Johnny keeping the pace of the match. Johnny ends up hitting a crossbody on Mean Mark for a near fall. Mark then hits a leg drop on Johnny Ace, and Mark hits a devastating elbow drop off the ropes, pins for the three, and your winner of the match is Mean Mark. Hats off to Mean Mark for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is Mike Rotunda and Tommy Rich versus the Samoan SWAT team. I thought it was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Rotunda and Rich keeping the pace of the match. Samu hits a power slam on Tommy Rich. Rotunda and Samu both exchange. Samu then hits an axe handle on Tommy Rich off the top rope. Pins for the three. And your winners of the match are the Samoan SWAT team. Hats off to the Samoan SWAT team for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a hair versus hair match. It is Paul Ellering versus Teddy Long. Thought it was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Paul Ellering and Teddy Long, with Paul keeping the pace of the match. Paul then hits Teddy with a boxing glove, pins for the three, and your winner of the match is Paul Ellering. Hats off to Paul Ellering for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the NWA United States Tag Team Championships. It is the Midnight Express versus Z-Man and Brian Pillman. A couple things I'll say about this matchup. Number one, it was a good matchup. In the beginning of the match, Cornette was actually locked in a cage throughout the duration of this match. It was a back and forth matchup between the Midnight Express and Z-Man and Brian Pillman. Z-Man and Pillman were keeping the pace of the match. Stan Lane ultimately hits an enziguri on Z-Man, and then Eaton capitalizes on that, hits a roll-up on the Z-Man, pins for the three, and your winners of the match are the Midnight Express. Hats off to the Midnight Express for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is the Rock and Roll Express versus the Freebirds. Thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with the Rock and Roll Express keeping the pace of the match. Michael Hayes hits a DDT on Robert Gibson, and then Morton hits a sunset roll-up, pins for the three, and your winners of the match are the Rock and Roll Express. Hats off to the Rock and Roll Express for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the NWA Tag Team Championships. It is Doom versus the Steiner Brothers. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between both teams. Scott ends up hitting a power slam on Ron Simmons. Rick then hits a pile driver on Ron as well. Steiners were keeping the pace. Butch Reed then hits a high knee on Scott in the middle of the ring. Rick then hits a power slam on Butch Reed. Rick and Reed both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Doom ultimately hitting the finish. Pins for the three, and your winners of the match. And at that time, new NWA Tag Team Champions are Doom. Hats off to Doom for getting a win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go to our next match of the night. It is the main event of Capitol Combat 1990. It is Ric Flair versus Lex Luger for the NWA Heavyweight Championship in a steel cage match. Number one, I thought it was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Flair and Luger, with Lex keeping the pace of the match. Lex hits a press slam on Flair. Flair gets up, lands devastating chops on Lex Luger. Flair then hits a knee drop on Lex in the middle of the ring. Lex then gets up, throws Flair into the cage. The Four Horsemen are here, as well as Sting. Four Horsemen end up attacking Sting. El Gigante makes his way down to the ring. Barry Windham somehow gets himself into the ring, attacks Lex Luger, and your winner of the match by disqualification is Lex Luger. Hats off to Lex Luger for getting the win in this matchup. A couple things I'm going to say about Captial Combat 1990 before I get out of here, man. Number one, it was a decent event at best. I feel like it was kind of lackluster. Some of the matches on here that were booked, I could have done really without, to be honest with you. Number one being Johnny Ace versus Mean Mark. Look, with all due respect to Johnny Ace, I know everybody knows it's John Laurinaitis, but he was not a good wrestler. He just, in my honest opinion, Johnny Ace or John Laurinaitis was not a good wrestler. In my honest opinion, obviously, he was a part of a tag team known as the Dynamic Dudes with Shane Douglas. But all in all, it wasn't like Johnny Ace was a multi-time tag team champion or a multi-time world champion. It just wasn't there. Mike Rotunda and Tommy Rich versus Samoan SWAT team. Samoan SWAT team's a fantastic tag team. Fatu and Samu was absolutely awesome. But all in all, I mean, I feel like the Samoan SWAT team was carrying the match, in my honest opinion. Rock and Roll Express versus the Freebirds, it was a decent match. Paul Ellering and Teddy Long, the hair versus hair match, I definitely could have done without. I'm not a big fan of the gimmick matches. And honestly, I really wouldn't call this match an actual match, in my honest opinion. But hats off to Paul Ellering for getting the win in this matchup. Doom versus the Steiner Brothers, absolutely fantastic match. Two of my favorite tag teams. You got Doom with Butch Reed and Ron Simmons versus the Steiner Brothers with Rick and Scott Steiner. Absolutely fantastic matchup. And obviously the main event being Ric Flair defending the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Lex Luger in a steel cage match. Absolutely phenomenal matchup, man. But all in all, if I had to give Captial Combat 1990 a solid rating from 1 out of 10, I'm probably going to give it a solid 5, maybe 5.5 at best. But this is my review of Captial Combat 1990. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.